Welcome to the Liberation Lab podcast, insights and interviews for the disruptive educator. I'm honored to have my sis on. I'm going to let her introduce herself. So, why don't you tell the people who you are, what you do, and why you do it?
Yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Erinn Cottman. I am an instructional leadership coach based in Atlanta. I have the honor and privilege to work with school leaders and educators in schools around the country, just refining their leadership, helping to build leaders. I say all the time, leaders are not born, they're built. And so that is what I get to do each and every day. I do what I do honestly for my brown and black babies. Like, I have a brown baby myself. I've worked only in black schools, and our babies deserve the world, so that's why I do what I do.
I think that's an awesome segue because right before we hit record, I was saying that people who look like you and I, when they enter K to 12, whether that be charter or public, they tend to get the novice teacher, the teacher who is just coming in to get the experience. And oftentimes it's a funnel for that teacher to then go where they really want to go. And so what winds up happening is when it comes to instruction, our babies are getting, I'm just going to say it plainly, our babies are getting in the bottom of the barrel where people will make all their mistakes here, learn from those mistakes, and then as they gain that capital, as they gain that experience that they can take and leverage, they take and leverage and go elsewhere. And so in the process, right, year 2 point whatever as an administrator, like I see how there's so much talk about behaviors and this and that. And I'm like, but usually if you just dig a little deeper, you'll find that behaviors are stemming from a lack of instructional excellence.
Yep.
And so I'm queuing this up for you because I want to ask you, right? Um, one, and I know the answer, but just go into it. It is it how we frame this issue of instructional or a lack of instructional excellence for our babies under the auspices of equity. Do you see this as an equity issue? And just talk to us about your experience with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting that you bring up like our schools typically being the starting point, right? So I was a TFA alum, right? So I did TFA, right? And I was like, I'm the outside TFA story. So I did TFA and was at my placement school for 15 years. That does not, like, you don't do that, right? Everyone else like went on to law school, medical school, policy, whatever, right? Like, it was a literal stepping stone, right? So what you're saying is 1,000% true. It's definitely falls under the equity issue because let's be clear, everything in your school building starts with the leader. And so if you have a leader, one, who doesn't have instructional excellence, and if we're being really honest, there are leaders who maybe can drive relationships and culture, but they don't understand instruction. And my thing is, if you don't understand instruction, I need you at least to have the people around you who do at the minimum, right? So if you don't have a leader, one who values and is an instructional leader, I often, will say, that's why I make the point of saying I'm an instructional leadership coach, right? Because I am for the person that wants to be instructionally sound, right? And know what rigor looks like, know what good instruction looks like, and has a high bar for students, all students, right? And so the equity issue comes in when you as the leader are not holding the bar high for what kids can do. And it's in little things like, right, if you're planning a science fair and you got, maybe you've got people who report to you, your AP of science is telling you, well, here are the options for projects, and you see stuff that isn't rigorous for third grade. an instructional leader is going to raise their hand and say, hey, no, because third graders across the town, across the way are doing XYZ. Why do we feel like our babies can't do that? Why did you put that down as a choice for teachers, right? So an instructional leader has to have the instructional eye, but they also have to understand it's an issue of equity, because if we are unpreparing, if we are not preparing students properly to go to the next level, whether that's the next grade, the next school, college, we are doing them a disservice. And that is an issue of equity.
Forgive me, I was doing the Zoom thing. I was on mute. Um, I agree. So here's how that plays out, even, right? Because what you're talking about is huge. So I want to start at the top, right? So I want to start at the building leader level, because I think when we have these conversations, teachers feel like they're dumped on, and they're like, oh, well, you're just, you're attacking us, but there's so much on our shoulders. So I want to start at the top. I want to start, with at the principal, supervisor, AP level, right? What I have seen, and this is in my work as a consultant, and in my work as a school leader, what I have seen is, I'm going to say, a lack of awareness from leadership. Now, I'm not saying that they all, you know, um, they're all fall on this, but what I'm seeing is a trend of knowing your strengths and then recruiting to your weaknesses, kind of like what you're talking about, where that's not really happening. For example, we would rather assume we know how to do the thing than to say, I don't really know and I need help. I
Yeah.
give you an example personally. I was doing work with a school and I gave them a survey with regard to restorative practices. How do we do this thing? What is your familiarity with it? So on and so forth. And I had one of the leaders, on a scale of 1 to 5, mark themselves as a 5. Well, then when I go meet with you and I ask you, well, why then, if you're a 5?
Why am I here?
Exactly right. Not only is it why am I here, but why don't I see the
Right.
evidences of your 5 anywhere in this school? So help me understand, and where, like, and after some investigative work, I realized you don't really know what this means. You think you do because you have a conversation with a kid after you suspend them, but that's not it, right? So I want to start there. When you're going into and you're looking at, you know, the leadership level, what are some of the prerequisites, I'm going to say, needed in order for you to establish strong instructional leadership in a school?
Yeah. So the first thing is you need to know the curriculums. You shouldn't be asking anything of teachers that you don't know, right? And I'll give you a perfect example. Everyone who knows me knows I was an ELA teacher, ELA and social studies coach. I don't like math. Oh well, I know I'm not supposed to say that on the pod, on the, people ain't supposed to hear me say that. I don't like it. I don't like it. I have math trauma, I have math anxiety from a child, right? But it's carried over, right? But there came a point in time where when I was thinking about being a school leader, I went to my boss like, hey, I need to coach math. I need at least one person to coach math with. Or can I come sit in some math meetings? Because I knew, while it doesn't have to be my favorite thing and I don't have to be the expert in my building, I've got to be able to add value to math conversations. I've got to know how this curriculum works, right? I have to know the pros and cons. I need to know the manipulatives and the blah and the 10 frames. And I got to know this stuff, right? I don't have to be the expert, but I have to know, I have to have at least a foundation, because how am I going to hold APs or coaches who are coaching math to a high level if I don't know? Right? So the first thing is you've got to be okay, right, with like learning curriculums, leaning into your weak spots, right? So that you are able to coach and help and develop in those areas. You've got to be in classrooms. Get out your office. You got to be in classrooms. You have to have boots on the ground. You have to understand, right? Because we all know, right, that these curriculums say one thing, and in practice, sometimes that's not how that actually works out, right? And so that's a fast way to lose credibility with your teachers when you're saying like, oh, well, the curriculum says do X, Y, Z, and they're trying to tell you, yeah, but that's not how it plays out, and you don't have any frame of reference, right?
Mm-hmm.
Teach, sub a class, teach. um, you're observing, co-teach with a teacher. Like, get in the keep your instructional practices like fresh. I would say the other thing is you've got to know and have a really clear vision of what instructional excellence looks like at your school. So is that if you're a project-based learning school, what does that look like? Right? What is the model for that? What does that look like? What does it feel like? What are teachers doing? What are students doing? What are parents like? What does it look like? I think part of the problem is sometimes we don't have a really clear vision of what strong instruction looks like at each grade level in each subject. And so I think that's part of the problem. And then leaders get overwhelmed because they know it's not right, but they don't have a vision that's like leading them in any sort of way. And I would also say it's important as an instructional leader that you create a culture of learning. So I have a client right now that is deep in the work of implementing science of reading, and they are literally training. And how this works is their leaders across all three schools are out of the building 3 days a month getting trained. Because if we're being honest, if I'm a middle school AP, I'm like, phoneme what? Right? Possibly. So, but in order for them to be able to turnkey and train their teachers, they have to know it. So they're spending time learning that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So you've got to create a culture where we understand that leaders are constantly learning and constantly like in the work too, versus rolling out science of reading and saying, hey teachers, here's the new science of reading stuff and here's what you need to know, and you just standing back, right? Like, you cannot coach, you cannot drive change if you do not know what you're driving.
100%. And you'll know those indicators by where people really spend their time when it all shakes out, right? So part of the struggle, I think, on both ends for me, as I hear that, is I agree with it 100%. You're not going to get any rebuttal from me. And when I see it play out, sometimes the culture and climate issues affect the instructional issues, but you won't get the culture and climate issues fixed until you get the instructional issues fixed. And so it becomes this vicious cycle where I'm going to use an example, right? If I go into a classroom, okay, and we have deficits in terms of, teachers leaving the profession, right?
Mhm.
We got I've been scouring for candidates at certain positions in my building.
Mhm.
Scouring. I'm on that thing all the time. Um, and I know that the behaviors that I'm seeing in a certain class is because the teacher in there isn't strong.
Right.
And I've done the requisite work to provide that teacher with training, to pull them out and to put them into another classroom where I know excellent instruction is happening, and saying, here are the things that I really need you to look for. Look at how this teacher does this and this. Look at the cooperative learning opportunities, because that's the one thing I need from you. I don't anything else we can work on some, but the primary thing I need you to do is to look at this cooperative learning strategies that she is using and pointing them out, and I can hand you those keys and then go back into your classroom, right?
Yeah.
Like, we've been using the see it, name it, do it protocol, right? So I've been going in. Now I see it, I name it, right? And I'm like, I'm gonna come back in a week. I want to see if you're gonna do it. And
Ain't no do
it's
it.
it's you know it ain't happening, right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and so and so in that space, it becomes this vicious cycle where I know that the my vision for the school that I am serving is is not that we're just better than the rest of the schools in the district, is
Right.
that we are actually providing high quality instruction that sets the bar for what other schools want to look at.
Yeah.
That's my vision. To do that, there's a lot of components, and I'm noticing that there's trends of uh, I'm going to say laziness, or there's trends of um, Sorry. There's trends of laziness. There's trends of, um, I'm going to use the word resistance.
Mm.
And it's not entirely their fault, because when you get pulled into, and this is where my question is coming from. When you get pulled into a situation, you realize very quickly that you're kind of thrown into a middle of a story that's been ongoing. And
Yeah,
if the initiatives have been, we're going to do this thing, that thing fails, we don't monitor that thing. Now we're going to do a new thing. That thing fails. We don't monitor it. And then we're going to do a new thing. What teachers begin to do is, I'm checked out. I'm not doing anything because you're going to pick up and do a new thing anyway. Before I even get a chance to be proficient in one, you're going to throw me another.
yep,
Um, so in that space where there's a lot of flux, in that space where there's teacher deficits, because and put all my cards on the table. Sometimes we talk about liberation and equity and all these things in a vacuum, and we don't talk about it in real terms.
yeah,
While I want to be a restorative school and to have all the things, there's people in my building, there's people in the schools that I work with who do not have the competencies to be able to do that, don't have the resources to be able to do that. And there are some situations where it's like, nah, that kid probably should be somewhere else,
yeah,
unfortunately.
yeah,
On the instructional side, when we're dealing with the realities of teacher deficits in terms of not having bodies in the room, all those different things, how do we combat all the other things that I'm talking about, with people not knowing, investments made and not seem like we're moving anywhere? How do we combat that? Because it seems like we're at a time where where hope is low, particularly right now when we're trying to get to that December break.
yeah. I mean, people don't like to hear it, but it's coaching, it's development, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Mm,
Um, it just doesn't. And I think sometimes we get really frustrated because we feel like we should see faster faster progress. But what I always tell instructional leaders, and when I say that, is anyone who's has coaching on their belt, right? Doesn't You don't have to be an instructional coach,
mhm,
but like, I mean, think about any sport you played or where you had a coach. You kept a coach all them years because there was like progress, that slow progress that had to be made, right? And it's no different. And I think sometimes we get really in pressurized situations, and schools really are they're pressurized, right? It's like, oh, we
for
have this
sure.
benchmark and this benchmark and that. And I used to always tell my folks, I care about the test, but I don't care about the test. I don't, right? Because at the end of the day, I care about student progress and growth. And if we're being really honest, there are some babies that, if I'm already behind 2 grade levels, I'm not jumping up 2 grade levels in one school year. I'm not. But if
100%.
I can get one, cool. That's progress. We were on the right track, right? And I think part of the reason that teachers get defeated and they're not bought into development is because what we're saying they're going to be able to do by the end of the year is sometimes not realistic.
Mm, hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
if I'm a brand new teacher, maybe the goal for me is why do I have the same goal as this other person, right? Like, as far as my personal development as a teacher, maybe
Yeah.
the goal is that my classroom is safe. I'm able to implement a clear I do, we do, you do.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's it, right? Like, and if I can do that by the end of this year, that is a win, right? Like, kids are learning and people are safe. Done, right? But I think sometimes we like overcomplicate what we want people to be able to do, and that's just not where everybody is.
Hmm.
And honestly, as admin, we can't give up on people. Is the bottom line. I always say you have to see the
Mm.
highest version of that teacher. When they are feeling down, when they feel like they can't do it, you have to be the person that maintains the hope for them that they can. And if you are
Mm.
in a situation where you have someone where you are actively coaching, you're doing side by side coaching, you're modeling, you're doing all the things. That's what I tell people. That's when you start to coach them out. At the end of the day, this is still this is employment, like, not volunteer work. So if you've truly identified that the issue is a will issue, right? Because I can coach the person all day who sucks, but they're trying. I will be right in there with you, right? I might be like, I don't know what the hell that was, right? But If I can see you're up, if I ask you to do XYZ and you're doing it and you're trying it, I will ride with you all the way through. Now, if I'm asking you to do something and you're yes, ma'am, yeah, and then when you get in your classroom, you're like, I ain't doing that, that's different. And at that point, that's when I tell someone, you can't be afraid to tell people to go. And I get, and there's ways to do it. So if HR tells you you need to put them on a PIP and you need to start the process, you do what you got to do. And I get every school is different, but it's also not an equitable experience to let somebody sit in a classroom and teach kids and kids aren't learning. Because
100%.
you're a parent, I'm a parent. Like, I wish.
I'm,
I wish my
I'm
kid wasn't learning all day. You got to go, right? And as a parent, I don't want to hear it's hard to fire them. Well, then they need to go be an aide somewhere. I don't know what they need to do, but they don't need to be in this
hmm
classroom.
hmm
So I often tell principals that I coach at a certain point, I get to a point where I'm like, so what you gonna do about it? Because every week we have the same conversation every week, and you're telling me this person's made zero progress in 6 months. So what we about to do? And I think that's where I find principals and leaders sometimes make inequitable decision because they decide that they would rather not be confrontational or and someone said something to me that made a lot of sense. You know, when people start saying, well, next year, no, this is this student's only third grade year. This is this student's only sixth grade year. This is this student's only kindergarten year. So while you're saying we'll just wait till next year, what's happening in that classroom for those kids?
100%. 100%. And to your point, let me just say that there are moments where, I have these conversations with folks and it is not only are we talking about a subject, but I'm reflecting and learning and challenged. And this is one of those moments for me, for sure. Um, because I say, when I talk about it, right, that either coach up or coach out, right? That's got to be it. And so, um, I'm challenged by it because, like, for example, I'm supposed to be theoretically over math and science. Now, math I could do all day, done it forever. I can do middle school math, all the things. I know you just vented and said you have math
Yeah, I was
trauma.
like,
We're
ew.
going, we'll talk about that. We'll work through that together. But the science piece, right? Like, I've never
Yeah,
taught. I wasn't the biggest fan of science in school because we didn't do a lot of active learning, and I think I would have been if we connected it more.
yeah.
Um, but now, like, the curricula and all the things, it's like I know I'm not doing the best job by my science teachers because I just don't know the curriculum well enough yet. On top of, I'm supposed to be focusing on instruction, but then the discipline stuff comes up, or then programming, and then we're down an administrator. So more happens, and I can easily fall into, well, next year,
Mhm.
right? So I appreciate you bringing that up because I think if we're not being reflective, I mean, then what are we really doing, right? How are we growing as a leader if we're not going to be self aware?
And sometimes
Uh,
it's just making a slight adjustment, right? Like I have a client who I'm developing their coaches. They have brand new coaches, and I had this whole scope and sequence for the whole year of what they were going to be able to do, and yada yada yada. And now that they're in the seat and they've been doing it a couple months, I had to say, okay, let me I see what they're doing well at. I see where they're struggling. I'm adjusting that. By the end of this school year, I need them to be able to do these two key things really, really well. And that's what I'm going to focus on for the rest of the year with them. These two
yeah,
things. Not this
yeah,
scope and sequence I made, right? And the thing is, let's be clear to differentiate. I have some coaches that they probably could do that whole scope. But the
yeah.
majority of them, let's just get these two things done, right? So it's not like you can adjust your plan and still keep it rigorous because what I'm adjusting to is rigorous for them. So you can adjust your plan as the leader without dropping the bar.
Hmm. But I think that takes wisdom too, because collectively, I think that we in education are playing this proverbial game of whack a mole, where it's like New initiative, we hit that one, we're good. New initiative, we hit that one, we're good. This thing we're focusing on this year, this is our focus for this is our theme for the year. We hit that one, we're good. And we're just continuously hitting all the things that it feels like we're spending so much time trying to keep up with the initiative that we're
Yeah.
not really getting proficient in anything. We're not really getting excellent at anything. So the wisdom that you're talking about to say, nope, we're going to focus on two things. I find stops at, in my experience, the building level. And sometimes it doesn't even get there. But it definitely does not happen at the district level. And I understand why. Because there's pressure on the district to have to change, transform. Uh, and money is tied to it all, for sure. But if I'm a teacher now, and I'm in the classroom, and, you know, a willing and able and even in process leader is coming in to support, giving you tools, resources, listening to you, the whole nine. Um, Let me back up. Let me phrase it this way. Let's say I'm listening to this conversation, and the essential question is, what if my teaching sucks? What if I'm not connecting with the students? What if I'm not getting them to a learning goal? And what if I'm making excuses like outside influences?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, these kids can't.
Mm-hmm.
What if I'm doing that in the process and I can logically make that connection in my head, even though I'm making broad generalities about every single black and brown student because that's what I'm focused on, black and brown student in front of me. I'm saying, oh, they must come from this type of family because they're not learning and I'm doing all the things right. Like, what if I'm that teacher and my teaching really sucks and I'm just not aware? How do I snap out of that and get on the path to growth?
I mean, I think that's when you have to have a really critical conversation as a leader.
Hmm.
Sometimes, see, people make comments like that and people don't say anything, right? So when I'm in a data meeting with you and we're looking at data and you keep saying, making, well, they and that, all right, let's pause the conversation. Is this acceptable for your child? Is this acceptable for your niece? If your niece's teacher was saying, well, she did it, right? Your cousin, whatever. Like that's the typical way that I reframe stuff like that for people because because the reality is no, it's not, right? So why is a teacher who doesn't have belief in their students acceptable? And so, and
Yeah.
it's, I know that's an uncomfortable thing to have to sometimes say to people, but that to
Yeah.
me is the only way that you to address that sort of mindset is head on.
Hmm. Yeah.
Right? When you said, I had someone the other day just literally telling me a story of another principal who said they didn't want to take a kid from their school. And she was like, I just was so bothered. And I was like, you know what? She's like, I said something to him directly. Like, why not? Because your perception is that kids from my school are bad. And this is a black man. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not right. So you've got to call stuff like that head on
Yeah.
because otherwise you're allowing that person to let that fester and it shows up in what in the worksheets they put in front of kids and the lessons that they plan or do not plan for kids. And you also have to tell people straight up, here's where your teaching falls. And you have the option. Either we can you can work on this mindset and I got you and we're going to coach and we're going to get this skill piece together. But the mindset piece, you got to decide that like in or out. And I feel like as a school leader, that should be non-negotiable.
For sure. Yeah.
That what I hear a lot from school leaders is if I let them go, I don't have someone to replace them. And I get that.
That's real.
But are we going to subject kids to being around? Because think about it. Your kid is with your teacher more than during the week than they're with you.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we're going to subject your kid to a teacher who doesn't believe that they can be anything in this world they want to be. Right?
That
Because we don't have a body to put in the classroom. Because that's what you got in there right now is just a body anyway. Is that, So it's
right.
all very complicated things. But like if we are saying that like to me, that's just like the bottom of that's the foundation. If you don't believe kids kids can do anything they want to do, then I'm not sure why you're here. Like, so we
So
don't
that,
have that in common, because that's the thing that you always try and re-ground people in, right? When you're like pushing a new initiative, when you've got, an ask, the thing you're supposed to be able to ground everyone in is we're doing what's best for kids.
yeah,
So if that's not there, you can't be on my staff. You
yeah,
just can't be.
yeah. Those are real conversations that I think have to happen across the board, and I think even now where I'm at, those are some conversations that I gotta have, right? Where I I have seen, I'm going to say in my experience to broaden things here. Um, in my experience, I've seen teachers who have an expectation of students that says, if I'm teaching you X, Y, and Z, right? The assumption is that I'm teaching it exactly the way it should be taught. And if you're not learning, it's your fault.
Yeah.
There's so please jump in, because what I want to get at is that the mindset of someone who's trying to grow as a teacher, that it's
No,
it's
it's
students'
not.
fault.
No, it's right. And that's the thing, right? So even take like beliefs piece, right? And add in, you know, I don't want to differentiate instruction, right? I know his IEP says XYZ, but I don't have time to do that. Right? So it's also about like we have to get out of this idea that like teaching is stagnant. For whatever reason, I don't like we really have to undo this idea of like, oh, it's a new fad, it's a new fad, it's a new fad. Yes, fads come. But sometimes in education, there is solid proof that the way we've been doing something doesn't work. And
Yeah.
so that should be a part of like when you as a leader envision like your perfect teacher, who do you want, like your vision of a teacher, who do you hire at your school? A continuous learner should be one of those buckets. And you should be asking questions around in their interview process around how have you been a continuous learner, and like really digging into that question,
Yeah.
because you need people who can learn the new curriculum, who can learn the new technology. Like, because the reality of the situation is if you're going to do this thing for a long time, and which we want you to do, right? Because we know that teachers just get better year after year after year after year. So we don't want you to feel like you got to go to admin. We want you to be in the classroom 20 something, 30 years, right?
Right.
But that's not that's you have to be understanding that that's going to mean that you add to your toolkit. That to me is part of it being a professional. If you think
Yeah.
about people in tech or corporate America, like they're constantly having to get new certifications, and like why is that not the bar, right? And an expectation of educators is that we are continuous learners.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
should just be a part of like the profile of a teacher.
Hmm. Hmm.
So to me, yes, that's like you are also not providing an equitable experience for students if you are teaching one way, and you're not willing to differentiate. You're not willing to try something new. Um, and we have to dig underneath. Sometimes, like I recently had a conversation with someone who just like didn't want to do stations, and I was like, "But girl, you got 10 kids in here. Like this is like station prime. Like I'm confused, right?" But as I dug underneath, she had a history of really bad classroom management, and she finally got it to a good place. So she was fighting so hard against the stations because in her brain, she's like, you don't know what I went through. And I finally got it right. And you telling me to change what,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes we also, as the leader, have to dig underneath to figure out why is there so much pushback? Is it
Yeah.
because you're like, I don't actually like technology and I don't want to seem incompetent. And if I try this thing or I implement this strategy, I might look incompetent.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you also have to dig between, because you got to figure out, is this a genuine I will not, or is this I'm scared, I'm nervous, I don't know, I feel uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
which issue is laying here, because I can work with uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I can
Yeah.
work with fear, you know?
So if I'm a teacher hearing this conversation and I say, you know what, that has been me. Um, I do need to grow. Um, Maybe I don't have the instructional leadership at my building the way that I want to, but I don't want to put my development and my growth in somebody else's hands.
Yeah.
What are some resources, books, your services, cough, cough, that uh, you can go ahead and put out there for folks so they can get in touch with just some resources for growth and things that you've seen.
Yeah. So I think I say all the time, one of the amazing things that came from all of us being home for a couple years was just the boom of like online resources and instruction and coaching and development. I would say if you are looking, so I would say one, if you're a coach who isn't being coached, right, and you need, because and you've been tasked with developing, right. Look into the work of Elena Aguilar and the Bright Morning team. They have a lot of free resources on their site. Good stuff that you can work through. I would say I recently plugged a book that I really like for ELA teachers. It's middle and high school literacy. And it's by the same folks of Leverage Leadership, Get Better Faster, all of that. But it's called Love and Literacy, and it literally talks about like, and you don't have to be a coach for that. That is a literal, if you were a teacher. And it's how do I create a strong literacy classroom for middle and high school, which can kind of sometimes get a little like, oh, well, what do we do? You know, kids kind of fall off sometimes with that. That's a
Yeah.
great book for that. I would say, as far as there's a ton of online folks who are like, you know, influencing, consulting, who have great products. I right now am doing actually for this exact reason, am doing a service on demand coaching. It's like, you got a question, you need help with something, I got you. And so I'm running that special right now, just for folks who really do need some support and help, and sometimes just a thought partner, but don't have that available to them. And so that's something I'm running. It's on my website that you can access that. I would say I have learned a ton, honestly, just through listening through podcasts and you know, like NPR every so often will have like some really dope, like up-to-date educational pieces to listen to. And also, y'all, get involved in whatever you got going on locally, right? So if you're, you know, if you work in charter world, like go find your state charter organization, get involved there. There are just a ton of options out there. You just got to really decide that you want to start kind of like feeding yourself that knowledge. And I think the other biggest thing I would say for a teacher who's just trying to figure it out is like get into your data, because your data is going to be like the biggest teacher really of it all, because you can do all this reading and books and all that, but if you're not able to dissect what's actually happening in your classroom, you're going to have it's going to be hard to apply what you're learning, right? So looking at your academic data, looking at your behavior data, get some like anecdotal data from your students. Like, what are you enjoying about my class? What are you not? What should I, you know, kids will tell you, what should I keep doing, right? Like check in with parents, like gather as much data so you have a landscape of what's happening in your classroom, so you know where you want to grow, and pick like one thing for the remainder of the year, right? One thing. And just really learn as much as you can about that one thing and bring it back to your classroom and actually apply it. And that's how you build your own culture of like constant learning and trying. And that's the only way you'll figure out what works and doesn't. But just like pick one thing and let that be the thing that you kind of really try to implement and internalize as an instructor and bring it to your classroom.
I agree, affirm so much of that. I think that there is, I've learned if you're willing to go after it, there are resources out there. And we'll put all that stuff in the show notes, those recommendations as well. How can folks get in touch with you, follow your work, and support you?
Yeah, so I keep it real simple. So my website is erinncottman.com. That's 2 N's in Erinn. My Instagram is @Erinn, Erinn Cottman. both of those are the easiest ways to get in touch with me. If you have questions, I'm pretty open to DMs. So, if you have questions, thoughts, things you want to chat more after you listen to this, feel free to shoot me a DM or head over to my website and you can email me from there. I envision a place, a world, and a system where teachers are constantly learning and that leaders are like pushing that development. And so whatever I can do to help folks get that going, I'm all about.
Well, you're much appreciated. Thank you for your work. Again, this is an issue of equity. This is an issue of what our babies deserve. And I hope that all of the Liberation Lab community hears that our babies deserve high quality instruction. And when I say that, sometimes we kind of just say jargon and we kind of forget what that really means. That teaching and learning should be happening every day. I think it's her name is Miss Lacey Robinson. I think she's the president or CEO of Unbound Ed. She said, "Equity is in the details of teaching and learning." I love that quote, and I hope that our listeners are taking that with them so we can grow together. So thank you for your time, sis, and thank you for your work.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.